This is Mind Over Matter in science fiction. And I'll start off, I'll introduce myself. My name is Stephen B. Pearl. B makes it easy to find me on the internet. I use mental abilities quite a lot in my science fiction. Cloning Freedom, I have a species that the males are all telepathic and the females are all telekinetic. And those are the otterzoids. And you can kind of get an idea of what they look like from the name. I also have used it in my novel Cats and in a couple of other places. So it's also mental abilities have been a lifelong study of mine. So pass it over to you, Theresa.
So my name's Theresa. I'm a spec fiction writer. And so in talking about Mind Over Matter, my debut novel, Warehouse Dreams, is actually about telepaths and psychokinetics in a dystopian society where some people can pay money to have children whose genetic code have been predetermined, and they're psychokinetics and telepaths. So, you know, lots of things flying around and telepathy, and it's fun. It's a fun, frightening, honestly, story.
Catherine?
Hi, I'm Catherine Fitzsimmons. I am an author of 5 books and the owner of Brain Lag, a publisher of science fiction and fantasy books based in outside of Toronto, Canada. And as you can see on Stephen's screen, I am the publisher of his Tinker and Cloning series, or Freedom series. And we have a total of 12 authors and 22 titles available now. You can get it all on brain-lag.com.
And just a quick note, if you want a nice sampling of the Brain Lag talent, the Light Between Stars is an anthology featuring stories from a bunch of us. So, and Alex.
Hi, I'm Alex G Zarate. I'm an author, artist, and photographer. I write urban fantasy and sci-fi. My sci-fi tale has a lot of elements with virtual worlds. My urban fantasy has a psychic teleporting cat. So there are a lot of abilities that shares it with a boy, and they can see thoughts and travel distances within those thoughts.
Okay, well, why don't we start off, and let's start off by breaking psychic facilities down into a few categories. I have here telekinesis, telepathy, and pyrokinesis. Any others that anybody wants to pop in, and we'll take them in sequence.
One that I have always found quite interesting is remote viewing, which was actually studied in the Cold War, both in the US and Russia. They were trying to identify individuals who could be told, you know, tell us about this location that they've never seen, and they could actually map it out, you know, in their mind, and then draw out the maps. And there was a fair bit of research done on that, both in the USSR and in the US. Nothing concrete ever came from it, but that I found to be a very interesting psychic ability.
Yeah, stats I heard with that it was running around around 30% or so accuracy, which was enough to put it over deniability, but had limited utility. Alex, Theresa, anything you want to throw in?
How about teleportation?
Teleportation?
Kind of a subset of psychokinesis or telekinesis, but it's there.
Or even astral projection.
Astral projection would be a good one. Yeah.
Okay.
Also a subset of telekinesis, I would say, or telepathy, I would say, but not. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
And
I think
the psychometry as well, the touching of an object and finding psychic impressions on it.
Mhm.
I have that in my paranormal romance.
Nice.
And you also have the Star Trek abilities, empathy, mind meld.
Yeah, I kind of look at the mind meld as touch telepathy, and empathy. For brevity's sake, I'll treat it as a subset of telekinesis for the discussion. Sorry, telepathy. Okay. I have a couple of thoughts about how telekinesis might work and the way that I envision it working in my own work. And then I'm going to go along with other people's modalities. The way I view it is that the telekinetic interacts at a subatomic level. And at the subatomic level, particles are always being exchanged, but it doesn't have a force to it because they're all going in random directions. And what the telekinetic does is set up a field that causes all the subatomic particles to project in one direction. And then action and reaction drives the object in the other. How do you envision telekinesis working? We'll start with Theresa and go around because that's just how you are on my screen.
I want that object and I shall move it there.
Oh, okay.
I honestly didn't get too into it. I got more into it with teleportation, but for kind of the psychokinesis part of it, I really didn't get too much into the weeds on that one. Telepathy I did, but yeah, no.
Okay, Catherine?
So I do think you bring up a good point, especially with paranormal abilities in science fiction, because it's easy enough in supernatural and fantasy fiction to just, it's magic, just works.
Yeah.
But certainly it's worth it in science fiction to look into how it would work and, like what exactly type of force does it take to lift that and how is it equalized so that the force doesn't just come out of nowhere? Is it actually coming in the brain? Is that where the opposite force, you have pressure downward when you lift a book upward? So I do like your idea about the subatomic particles, and I think there's a lot of room to use various different types of ways of making the force here, like present.
Okay, Alex?
Yeah, the kind of like how Catherine was saying about the different forces. It reminds me a little bit about Mistborn, where they have people who have different abilities based on metals. One of them being a coin shot, that he has the force that he pushes on metal is equivalent to his own. So if it's a larger piece of metal, he needs something else to counterbalance that. Otherwise, if he's trying to push something too huge, he's literally pushing himself away. So yes, if he wants to push something away, it's a lot easier to have a little coin that he can whip at somebody and he uses it as a projectile. For things like telepathy or telekinetics, when you're moving things, I could see that as being a way to counterbalance what's going on, where you need to have this equal force, whether it's mental or physical, to be added to the factor so that you can actually show. It's like if you're lifting something physically, if you have something you're physically lifting up, you have to use so much force of your body to do it. So if you're doing it mentally, there has to be something equivalent to that you're exercising, and that would be a way of explaining it in science fiction, so that you have to show the effort being done. Otherwise, then it goes into the realm of magic rather than the mental telekinetic abilities.
Yeah.
That also reminds me of what I read about a certain fantasy book in which the author would do that type of thing. Like when he was trying to figure out how the magic would work, in his book, and this was an epic fantasy, but he actually calculated, okay, how much energy would it take to, draw water out from 4 feet underground, so and so amount of water. And is there a more efficient way of doing that, or, of achieving my means? And that's something worth looking into for science fiction.
Now, one of the things I've said on many occasions is that if you don't place limits on a telekinetic, they're going to paste everybody. Because if you have unlimited telekinesis, they can reach in and pinch off the arteries in somebody's heart. So what kind of limitations do you like to use with your telekinetics? Theresa?
My dogs are going crazy. How about somebody else goes while they get calmed down?
Catherine?
So I'm going to preface this by saying I haven't actually written psychic abilities yet. So this is kind of based on, what I've taken in terms of literature, and there's all sorts of ways you can impress limitations on it. And I think a large one that tends to be used is control. How much actual fine motor manipulation do they have with these things? Yes, you could pinch off the arteries in a person, but is attempting to do that just going to crush their chests into a ball? And I think that's often the limitation. But there's again, the amount of force you can use and how to counteract that. There's a lot of different options there.
Okay. Alex?
I do not have a current story with telekinesis on it. That was a side story that does have pyrokinesis, but just the same as that, it requires effort and concentration, kind of playing off the notion of the super characters that we see nowadays. It requires a certain emotional impact. So if you have a tense situation, the ability almost instinctively comes out, almost like lashing out without realizing it until it's too late. For telekinesis, it would be the same thing, where it has to take a certain amount of effort, but at the same time, if you have this ability, if you're emotionally distraught, you could inadvertently, like you said, pinch a nerve or tear apart a room without, realizing you've actually done something that should have been kept in control, but you didn't because you were just so upset at the time.
Okay. And Theresa, are things under control there?
Yeah, things are back under control here. There was somebody at the door. So they have to protect us. So for me, this was something that was huge as I was writing it, because if all of my characters are psychokinetic or telekinetic, problem solved. Any issues that pop up, they just use their abilities and poof, it's gone. So I really had to go into control, especially for tiny little things, and be like, the fine tuning of like being able to close blood vessels is that people don't have that amount of control. Also, a lot of my characters are teenagers and just learning how to use their abilities as well. So kind of able to do a lot of descriptions around, you need to have those fine motor controls. It takes effort, it takes focus. We need to work on meditation skills so that the brain isn't so full of so much stuff that we can't even focus. My characters have to do yoga, because when they're focusing really hard, their bodies get so tense because they're living in their heads that it affects their physical well-being as well. So yeah, for me, it was about creating limits so that the plot could continue.
Yeah, I tackled the issue in two separate ways. One, in my novel Cats, things had to be line of sight, and I put a strict weight limit on what the character could telekinetically move. And in Cloning Freedom, that telekinesis was lifted from the genetic of another species and put into this woman. And as such, every time she used her ability, she caused brain damage. And the greater the weight, the greater the brain damage. So
That's an intriguing
limited
idea.
things nicely. I will. Is anybody else here familiar with the works done on poltergeist phenomena? Just real science into the. No? Okay, I'll skip that part then. Okay, let's move on to telepathy. What kind of limits do you put on telepathy? Can they read anything? Can they force somebody to remember something? Or is it just surface thoughts? What costs? Let's riff with this. Theresa?
So one thing I really focused on was shielding, the ability to actually block your thoughts from other telepaths. And it was amazing to me because to me this was so easy. And I had a couple of beta readers who weren't huge into sci-fi that were like, what are we doing? What are shields? And I'm like, no, you would want to have something to prevent people. So again, working with teenagers, there's a lot of like, thoughts kind of leaking through. And like, so the teachers having to like increase their shielding constantly to be like, I don't want to know that stuff. But there's also my main character whose point of view, she's very, very powerful. And so she can kind of sort of like see, she calls it kind of ripples of thoughts underneath the surface of people's shields. Additionally, the way that she sees them is personality based. So it's based on almost kind of auras where it's colors and shapes and movement. And that dictates A, the other character's personality, and B, what they're feeling. So like colors will shift and spike and change and move. And so it was really, really fun to write that. And it's one of the things that I've gotten so much feedback on that people have loved, because I didn't have to do like the character frowned in anger. I was able to show it through the shifting of shields, which was, unique and fun. And it's been interesting because I'm working on the sequel from another character's point of view, and I don't have that anymore. And it's been really limiting to be like, dang it, I shouldn't have made that ability so unique.
Mm-hmm. Just where, boy, this does not work well.
You can kind of see it.
Yeah. Sorry. Psychic, the Llewellyn Practical Guide to Psychic Self-Defense and Well-Being. Your mention of shields brought it to mind. Excellent book, by the way. Catherine?
So one thing that often bugs me in stories about telepaths is the fact that they hear, they're listening to people's thoughts, and it's always complete sentences on linear thought lines. And I don't know about anyone else, but at any given moment, my mind's racing from one topic to another. I don't think in words sometimes, you're just thinking in images. And I'd like to see that conveyed more. And I actually want to mention a book series that I've been reading recently, Wings of Fire. It's a middle grade fantasy series about dragons. And there's a character who is a mind reader. And I really liked the way that her mind reading is portrayed, because some characters, they're very slow thinking. They don't really have, much going on. They're not that worried. There's other characters who are like super bubbly and happy, and they're always like, oh my gosh, the new friend and all this. And then there was the one character who is constantly calculating and examining his surroundings and trying to figure out, what's the best way to put this to my advantage? Okay, what's this person's motivations? And, this one character just getting a glimpse of his thoughts would be a whole paragraph of observations that this character is going through. And so I think that was a really good depiction of mind reading, especially because the mind reading character doesn't do it deliberately. She's just constantly hearing everyone's thoughts at all times. And it's also very overwhelming for her at times, particularly when she gets into a very crowded place.
There was some excellent work done on that in the X-Men comic book when they would show the telepath losing it and just opening up totally, and you had all these word bubbles all over the place, completely disjointed thoughts from the crowd. Okay, Alex?
For my book, I have the cat that has this psychic ability and the ability to teleport, shares it with the boy, and it is mind reading for its own sake, but because I had to address how he speaks to the cat, he does only see images. All he sees are thought bubbles basically coming from the cat in ripples, and each ripple can actually lead to others. So when he begins seeing thoughts from other people, he can actually follow where these thoughts came from. And it's kind of like an echo that goes out in different directions, and you can follow each one to other paths, which also leads to the teleportation. So that if he can find an intense enough route to this thought, he can transport to that location. For the first book, he's actually learning about this, and he's beginning to understand, these things he sees are actually thoughts from people. And in the second book, I push it to the next degree, which is, the first book, he had some killer trying to find this cat and trying to get him. In the second book, his abilities have grown to the degree where he can now see these echoes in objects. And because this crazy person was actually going to his home looking for him and going to his school, now he's finding these impressions echoing from his doorstep and echoing at school. So he begins having these panic attacks because this horrible person that came to kill his family, kill his friends, is actually everywhere now. And he does everything he can to suppress this power until some event takes place and he has to start drawing upon it again. And it's the cat who begins to help him get out of that again. So yeah, there's a constant effort on his part, but it is it's always images that he sees. It's not he doesn't hear words. He doesn't hear like you said, complete sentences. It's all just thought images and echoes of different events that took place in a later book. The current book actually. He's already in his late teens. He's had some personal losses, and a neighbor who passed away was one of his closest friends. So he's holding one of her glasses that she liked to drink out of, and he can see the echoes of that when she was sitting there having a conversation with him on the porch. So he's actually talking to her, even though it's only a memory being displayed for him. So he sees it and he's just holding it and trying to connect with her again and trying to feel less alone, because he's one of the only people who has this ability and no one knows about it. So he's kind of secluded in that way, and trying to always make sure he doesn't expose himself, because he understands at this point that letting other people know would just put him and them in danger.
That factors in nicely to the next thing I want to address, which is just how far do you take the telepathy? Do they only perceive the thoughts that the person is currently thinking, or can they actually sift through and access the person's memories? And how do those limitations play into the drama and the work? We'll go Theresa again. And
so not so much shifting through memories. There's definitely, this is a full society. So there are elements of it's rude to go into people's thoughts. People tend to kind of know when you're doing it. It kind of depends on people's skill levels, but they can kind of be like, hey, what are you doing? Get out of my brain. Or they can actually do like a ping attack and be like, get out. So there's not really the ability to go into memories. There is an element of dream sharing and dream controlling that does kind of happen in Warehouse Dreams, which is kind of fun. And with the sequel, I've been playing around with the idea of using dreams to go into memories, but it's uncontrolled and unintentional. But for the most part, my characters either can just kind of see superficial thoughts unless they really want to dive down deep and deal with the potential repercussions of getting an attack back, or it's an intentional, focused conversation that I'm having with you. And that's been fun too, you know, kind of going back to something that Catherine said of, I can be in a circle of people and I can have a verbal conversation with everybody in the circle while I'm also having a telepathic conversation with just one person in there. And I could have a telepathic conversation with a couple of people in the group, but not necessarily everybody. So that can lead to some really fun layers of you know, verbal conversations, and then some commentary, some telepathic commentary about the verbal conversation as well. So
Okay, Catherine.
So it certainly seems as though a lot of telepathy in science fiction does tend to focus on the surface thoughts and not so much. And if you're diving into memories and such like that, it's usually a very deliberate thing. You know, you have to actually be trying to do that, not just taking it in as, you know, you're hearing the surface thoughts of people around you. But it'd be interesting to kind of play around with that, because a lot of our surface thoughts are influenced by deeper thoughts and by our memories. And so like you could have a telepath kind of following a road, sort of a roadmap, you know, from why are they having this surface thought to, oh, there's this deeper thought behind it, to, oh, there's this memory associated with this. But it's hard to be sure how far you can go into memory, because I mean, there's a lot of stuff in our own long-term memories that we don't even realize we still have.
Or we don't want to have anymore. Okay,
yeah,
Alex.
Yeah, definitely. I try to keep things on the surface, although just like anything else, the ability that my characters have goes into the thought images as kind of like a ripple effect, echoes of past events. The more intense the event, the more intense the memory, the more vivid, and kind of like just a pebbles in a pond. Every thought is echoing from every direction, so he can follow one thought into another to find out where it's coming from. But it's the deeper you go, the more you have to concentrate on it. And the most he typically does is try to find the most intense emotion to locate a place that he wants to go to. He doesn't really go too deep into people's thoughts. There's no actual, like a data of information where he can find out words and phrases. It's more just a collection of images that he can retrieve, or events that are being played out. At one point, he is blocked, and that was a surprise for him. And I threw that in because there had to be a way when he encounters others like himself to protect, information that he has and things that he knows. And that actually plays a part in his becoming, stronger than he was in the beginning. It begins with him learning about it, and it grows into him becoming the mentor and teacher to others like him. So it's a constant growing process, but everything is interlaced, and it's like a psychic impressions on an object. Thoughts and images are the same. The more intense a thought, the clearer it is. the less important it is, the less, less clarity there can be. But there's no deep, deep reading of people, just on a casual basis. Everything has to be done in a level of degrees.
Yeah, blocking, you're really good because you keep feeding into what I want to do next. Uh, blocking brings me to the thing of, how do you defend against it? You're dealing with the telepath. How do you defend against it? I mean, the two things I can see are believing the lie that you're telling, convincing yourself that this lie is reality, and ignorance. Terry Pratchett had the granny character who always won the competition when it was, don't think about a hippopotamus. And the reason she could always win that competition, she didn't know what a hippopotamus was. So, Theresa, how do you have defense set up for your telepaths?
So it really is kind of that shielding, that and again, it's based on skill. Some people have very weak shielding, either because their abilities aren't very strong or they were never properly trained. And so there's a lot of, with those people, there's a lot of leak through and a lot of almost back, you know how when you're having a conversation with someone and they're talking a lot and you're like, and you're backing away from them. That's kind of almost what happens here, of like the stronger people kind of back away from the other people and are like, more shielding, let's leave, bye. But it really is just around the shields.
Okay. Catherine?
So I'm reminded of when I took a yoga class way back in college, and each class would end with a meditation session. And I specifically remember when the teacher was telling us how to meditate, she would say, picture a whiteboard or a white screen and focus on that white screen. And if a thought pops into your mind, imagine it like it's written on the screen, acknowledge it, and then wipe it away. And that was really helpful for settling my mind. And I figure it would be the same for blocking out your surface thoughts from telepaths. Another thing it reminded me of is the 1990s Rear Window remake with Christopher Reeve. It was actually the first movie he made after his accident. And no, sorry, not Rear Window. It was not Children of the Corn, but it was evil children in the town, pale hair. They were all telepaths, and he was kind of central to stopping them with a bomb. Sorry, giving it away. And at the end, he's like trapped. There's these children all around. They're trying to figure out what he's getting at. And he just pictures a brick wall. And so it cuts to images of this brick wall, and the brick wall just keeps getting assaulted, and eventually it breaks. But essentially that's the same thing. It was his mental shielding against these kids, trying to read his mind and figure out what he's doing.
Okay, Alex?
A similar thing with mine. I had pretty much the concept of light and darkness, where if you keep your thoughts into darkness, so you imagine shadows and darkness around you, it blocks any kind of peering into what you're thinking. And that's something that my character finds out when he encounters someone else like him, who had a lot of traumatic events in her childhood. She pretty much blocked her companion, her cat, from entering her mind because she was so traumatized and she saw the entire world as being a dark place. And then it wasn't until later she emerges from that, and she becomes a part of my character's life, and she realizes, oh, there's ways to block one another. So she hangs around his life for a long time without him ever realizing she's just like him. And it's because she is able to intentionally, imagine, shadows and darkness around her whenever she's around him, just to make sure he can't read what she's thinking, what she's doing, what she's aware of. And when she passes this knowledge along to him, in the current novel, he finds someone else who is kind of embraced the evil part of their gift, which is you can see the good in the world, but you can see all the bad. And where he and the cats are always trying to emphasize, you're there to connect with people, to help them, to be there. This other person suffered so much trauma that he pretty much said, I want to, just go the opposite way. I want to hurt and cause all the pain I can, because that's all I see now. So the only way to defend against someone who is telepathic and can teleport is you have to find a way to block them so they don't know what you're doing. So that's how he's able to utilize this knowledge and how to block as this book comes along. But it's a matter of darkness and like you said, building a brick wall, but it's a wall of darkness that you have to put in there and just keep in the back of your mind as you're engaging with someone, and it pretty much just keeps them from looking at you at all. So all they see is you as a person. They don't see what you're thinking or what you have planned, and that becomes essential as the story progresses.
Another example, if I may, just briefly, something that this conversation has reminded me of was a few years ago, my dad was telling me about a game that he had acquired, which involved putting a band around your head that would detect your brain waves. And the game was to get to actually concentrate and use your brain to move a ball along a track. And he told me that he found one of the best ways he had to be able to focus enough to make the ball go was doing algebra in his head.
That's interesting. I never heard of that before. Okay, well, I also, the interesting thing of blocking people that Alex brought up, because it's gonna, I like things that are a blessing and a curse. And I think that all of these abilities can go either way depending on how they're used. So I'm going to move on to pyrokinesis, basically because it's on my list. Has anybody played with pyrokinesis in their writing?
I did. I actually early drafts had some. I ended up cutting it because it felt too superhero-y, and I was already kind of moving in the superhero direction. In fact, some of the reviews have said it's similar to X-Men and everything else, and so I was trying to not be shoehorned into that. So I stayed away from that one.
Okay. Yeah, my thing with pyrokinesis is that, again, it's like all of these. You have to not ask where you are on the spectrum. Can you influence fire, but not start it? Can you, with great concentration and dry kindling, start a fire? Or are you a walking flamethrower like Harry Dresden?
Or fire starter.
Yeah. Sorry?
One thing I will comment on, about the only example of pyrokinesis that immediately comes to mind was from the 1990s Superman cartoon. There was a young woman who was identified as a pyrokinetic, and bad stuff happened. She ended up being caught and trapped in like this plastic bubble that had an inert gas inside it, so that she could not start her fires. and then, you know, the bubble broke, she got her hand through and she made a fist and there's fire. And two main problems I had with that. One, being able to start fires does not make you fireproof. And number two, pyrokinesis is by its definition something that you don't need immediate contact with to be able to start. Am I right?
Well, you don't want to have immediate contact with it because you can burn yourself.
Exactly, exactly.
So yeah, and if you're going to go down that road, like, you know, you see people that have like the fireballs in their hands, is there, you know, some sort of a barrier, some sort of a force that is protecting them? Because, you know, as soon as they throw it or do whatever it is they're going to do with that, then that force disappears. So it's a fascinating question.
And
Yeah,
there's a lot of other physics that come into play as well. There's a character in one of the other Brain Lag books, Green Light to Paradise, which at one point in the story, he is interrogating someone and not getting the answers that he wants. So he ignites the contents of the victim's stomach. So the fire obviously does, yes, the fire obviously doesn't last long because there's no oxygen in there to sustain it, but he gets that moment of pain.
Ouch.
and one of the stories I've got, it's called The Cure, which it's anything but. One of the characters is a pyrokinetic, and I treat that as it is kind of like breathing, except it's with the temperature around her. So it's like she can project and absorb heat. So when fire does happen around her, she can remain protected while at the same time trying to accelerate it when she wants things to burn. But for the most part, it's like you said, it's like, yeah, she can keep herself safe, but basically if she walks through a burning building, you know, her shirt, her anything she's wearing is actually going to burst into flame as well, and she has to concentrate just to keep herself safe. But it's a matter of control, and you know, if you're going to be absorbing or projecting it, you know, it's not as easy as, you know, like you're saying, concentrating on one thing and bringing it to fire in just one location. It's more of a an exhalation of this ability and increased temperature in a certain spot, kind of like breathing out in a direction. Now you can do that, but you can't with any accuracy do it in a the farther away you go.
Yeah, the way I've always viewed it is that you'd have to pick a very small piece of matter that's preferably highly combustible and excite the molecules in it so that it would naturally increase in temperature to its combustion point. After that, you've got fire anyway, so you can just build it up.
Okay. Like a fire starter.
Yeah, fire starter, good example. Okay, well, I think it was Catherine threw out remote viewing. Has anybody used that in their work? I've played a little bit with it where they were actually in a computer game. The computer game was mimicking paranormal abilities. And they did have remote viewing. And this is in Cats. And it was a rather interesting scene because the evil hacker who has trapped them in the game and won't let them out is remote viewing on the characters. And one of the characters who's a really good with code breaks into the game's code and arrange it so that the one guy trying to remote view feels like he's being flayed every time that the skin's being peeled off him. So it kind of discourages that. But
in the story I've got, there's one moment that is very reminiscent of remote viewing, but for the abilities that are on there, he actually is the one bad character. He's facing off with a detective, and rather than tell the detective what he's thinking, he actually traces the thoughts back to his wife and children at home. And then he's actually starting to threaten the detective, saying, I'm giving you a choice to leave me alone, or in the next 5 minutes, I'm going to be at the side of your wife, and I'm going to kill her and your children. And this detective is like, what? You can't do that. And he starts actually describing. He says, oh, do you like lasagna? I think she's cooking that right now. It's still in the oven. Your child is sitting in the living room watching TV, and your youngest is in the crib. And he's telling him all these things, and he's saying, you can choose what you want to do, but whatever you choose, it's gonna affect everything. So if you want to come after me, wonderful. Your family will be dead in 5 minutes. And he said, "Whoa, my family lives across town." And he said, I didn't ask you where they were. I just told you what would happen. So make your choice of what you want to do. And he says, your gun's right there. Just reach for it. And he's giving this, but it's like it goes to the point where you can remote see what's going on, because these are his active thoughts about his family. So he can actually trace it back to his home, and he sees all these things happening at the same time. And that threat is, for the detective, is just overwhelming. So he pretty much is like, okay, he's done with everything. He's walking away. It's too intense. And he's like, at the last sentence of that exchange is, the detective sees him, and one of the indications of these abilities is his eyes glow bright green. And when the detective looks up to him, he sees his eyes, and he's like, what are you? So it's a very intense moment where my character, the main character, is constantly concealing what he can do, and trying to find the best ways to help people. This one is actually looking into what best ways to get his way, and to make the threats that he wants to, and then again follow through, because they can teleport. So it's a very intense scene.
That's actually very interesting also, because as I recall, the primary purpose of the remote viewing experiments done in the USSR and in the US was to try to get the layout of top secret buildings. So, taking that step further about who's in it at the moment, what are they doing at the moment, also that's a whole nother level to it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What do you see as the division between magic in fantasy and paranormal abilities in science fiction? Because there's a lot of similarities, and especially when you come right down to the nuts and bolts of what's being accomplished. But what do you think defines the differences between them? Anyone want to go first? No, not me.
No, that was scary. I'm like, I don't know.
I would say the primary difference is, for science fiction, you actually have to explain what is happening. When it comes to other genres, most of the time it's just, you treat it like magic. It works because it works. So you can just create this ability, and just say, well, it's there because it's been there for a long time. We just have these people, some that are good and some that are not. But with science fiction, the more you get into it, the more you have to explain, well, it originated from this. It's because someone has, this genetic quality, or this trait, and they, like you're saying, they use, the mechanics of it, and they can control because of these factors, or these elements are in place. But when you're dealing with, magic systems, you can limit them in a way, but for the most part, it's like it's all encompassing. The Harry Potter things, it's one wand and they can do all these things in a few words. Whereas when you're dealing with psychic abilities, or telekinesis and pyrokinesis and remote viewing, it's a lot of times with science fiction, you have to explain where it comes from and how come it's working. Otherwise, you lose your audience, you lose the readers. It's different when you deal with magic.
At the same time, though, most fantasy tends to address where the magic comes from, how it works. Like you were explaining Mistborn earlier, there's lot of different fantasy that gets into exactly what the limitations are and how it's achieved, even if it's an unusual method like burning metal in your stomach.
Mhm.
I don't think that's quite the line there, because
Today, definitely. But for past, magical systems, it was always, you look at the way Gandalf would use magic, and all the other characters. All the time, it was magical because they were magical beings. Today, we're actually going into it, so that's where we can get the villains. You actually can see a different perspective of them, whereas before it was like, it's clear, bad person here, good person here. And nowadays you actually are seeing the motivations behind them, what the origins were, how they turned to this level. And of course we're looking into it, what the elements are involved in creating these magical things. But like I was saying about, Harry Potter, there's a certain level of control to it, but it's still, you're dealing with magic. The Doctor Strange, or you have to have there's certain phrases and certain movements that will create it. What was the one the character had said? It's learning the operating system of the universe. If you don't want to use the word magic, so
I
it's
think. I'm
we're
sorry.
becoming more. Oh, it's okay. We're becoming more aware of, explaining things will help out a lot more, and it's kind of blurring the lines a little bit between fantasy and science fiction, because before only science fiction would go to the effort of having to explain everything to such a degree, because it was a very logic based type of, you have to tell people how it is so you can show it's possible. And magic, they didn't have to worry about it before. Today we're actually going into it more, which is why I wanted to make sure, I don't want to have a conversation with the boy and the cat, just words back and forth. I wanted to make sure they communicate in a certain way, which gave them a limitation, but at the same time, it gave people the understanding that, it's nonverbal, that you can communicate in this way, and it's very understandable, but it's not, you're not sitting there exchanging words back and forth.
I think setting comes into play.
Mhm.
I think, contemporary, you could kind of do, there's some overlap in urban fantasy, although a lot of times when we say urban fantasy, we think vampires, shifters, and witches. But I think as we're talking magic and science fiction, I think it's setting maybe, that may come into it, and what the author calls it. If you're using a system of, with a wand, that's magic. If you're using a system with incantations, that's magic. If you're using a system of, I just really need to focus really hard here, maybe that's more science fiction. So I think that can play into it as well, not exclusively, but to some degree.
There's one line that ties in nicely in that I used in a novel, Worlds Apart, and the character is speaking to an extra universal, actually, individual who's come to our universe and has incredible magical powers. And the woman is herself a second degree Wiccan and knows a fair bit about what's going on. And she's saying, and you're yelling at me because I don't know some Harry Potter wand waving BS. It's sort of, it's sort of what serious occultists are looking at Harry Potter and going, well, it's a nice fantasy and I wish I could, but yeah, I think that there's a lot of good points in that. And I think that a distinction could be in a fantasy magic, you scribe a circle and use that to enhance your abilities. In a science fiction magic, you make a circle out of copper, a copper coil, and use that to enhance your abilities because it's all energy dynamics. It's just you're placing more of a emphasis on the scientific interaction.
And you can always go back to the classic Rod Serling quote, fantasy is the impossible made probable. Science fiction is the improbable made possible. And that kind of brings me to a book I read a book I edited a few years ago. It was 2 or 3 years ago, and this was not a speculative fiction book. It was like a thriller, a modern day thriller novel. And in it, there's a character who receives a brain implant, which directs information directly into his brain, and it directly goes into the long-term storage of his brain using light pulses that kind of reduces it to binary code and puts it directly into the long-term memory storage. And so it was also like Wi-Fi enabled, so he could, connect to the internet in his head and absorb the entirety of like War and Peace in a manner of less than a minute. And he would have that knowledge in his mind that he can access himself, as well as he could get directions to places, anything you do on the internet. And as the author stated in the preface to the book, it was actually based on current technology and current breakthroughs in machine brain interaction. And so I think there's a lot of room there for being able to employ telekinetic and telepathic abilities and things like that, in a very scientific and, in fact, fairly current method.
Well, we're almost out of time, so why don't we do a quick round and each pitch our book? So, Theresa?
All right, so my book is Warehouse Dreams. I actually have it right here. So Warehouse Dreams, you can check it out. Soft sci-fi, there's a romance element to it as well. I also have my paranormal romance coming out in April. It's called River City Widows. It's about a widow in East Sacramento whose stepdaughter brings home a Ouija board from college. So lots of fun things happen in that house after that. And then I have a creative nonfiction piece called Lost Aboard about the ghosts aboard Star of India, which is an old ship in San Diego Harbor. And I'm also a podcaster for Semi-Sages of the Pages. We are a podcast for writers. Our tagline is, we don't know where we're going, but we know we're on an adventure. So we talk about our adventures in writing. So that's me.
Okay. Catherine?
So again, I'm Catherine Fitzsimmons. I'm an author of 5 books from science fiction to fantasy. You can find them on the website for the publishing company I own, brain-lag.com. You can see it in Stephen's backdrop there. We also have all those books that are behind him there, also available.
Okay. Alex?
And my latest book is Reflections in Darkness. Got this right here. And it is a second book in the Connections trilogy. The series itself is been out for a while. It's all on Amazon. You can find me at alexgzarate.com or in social media, Alex G Zarate. I'm everywhere.
Okay.
And sorry, I just wanted to say congratulations to Theresa on your upcoming release.
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm Stephen B. Pearl, and I have multiple books published, but the ones that deal with paranormal are some paranormal elements in science fiction format, Cloning Freedom, and Cats. And then there's my paranormal works, which just deal with magic outright. And www.stephenpearl.com, Stephen with a PH, or put Stephen B. Pearl into Google and I pop up. I'm also on Amazon, Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest. And thanks all for watching, and thank you to my panelists. You've done a great job, and we'll hopefully see you soon.
And thank you for hosting.
Thank you. This was really fun.
Mhm.
Agreed.